Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I would like to welcome you to the opening session of this symposium organized by Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies under the title of Sports Politics Society, which will be held in this auditorium and be attended by many researchers and participants from the Arab countries. We aim in this symposium to study the phenomena of sports. Nowadays, it's undeniable the importance of sports and its applications in other dynamics apart from sport. After nearly 6 decades of the interest shown by social sciences in studying sports and continuously proving that sports is more than just a leisure activity, we do not need to delve into more details in providing proof and illustrations because this has become a given, and the literature in this regard are many indeed, starting with the field of history and end with public studies, anthropology, political science, international relations, cultural studies, philosophy, and other disciplines. Despite that, I would like in this brief opening remarks would like to mention three important aspects of organizing this event. First, this symposium comes as a direct response to Qatar organizing the World Cup Finals 2022 because the center, after all, is to research into these events and phenomena, and therefore a center like this, an institution like this, cannot turn a blind eye to this major or probably the biggest sports event, and we're only miles away from the nearest stadium. And an institution like this cannot but interact with the fabric of society, where hundreds of thousands of people from all corners of the earth will be coming to this country, and the country as a whole is preparing for hosting this event. So social sciences has to interact with this. The second aspect is we have said that sports is not just sports, and organizing this event does not stop at the technical aspect of organizing the event, the matches, the media coverage, and others. It's also a complete social activity, a social practice, and a scientific one. We're not talking about riddles, unexplained, ambiguous phenomena. We interact negatively or positively with what goes on in our communities, and we must benefit from the momentum created by organizing this event to produce knowledge. And in my estimation, the scientific knowledge produced will be the biggest Arab contribution, probably from the point of view of social sciences. In the last 2 months, we organized 2 conferences, and there are 2 journals by the center which now have special issues. So we're talking about conferences, special issues, symposiums, etc. And if we remember the scarcity of Arab contribution academically to this phenomena, we will appreciate the importance of what is happening now. Thirdly, this dynamic which is being created will not stop at transferring this theoretical knowledge into Arabic. What is probably more important is now that the Arab theme now and the Arab subject has become a subject of study and the focus of research, and therefore this can contribute to revisiting some of the international theories. And I would like to commend the efforts by Arab social scientists and researchers, but they have produced this knowledge in languages other than Arabic. An important percentage of them take part in this symposium, and I hope that their efforts will be added and complementary to the Arab knowledge produced. And finally, the papers which will be presented will be published in Imran and Siyasat Arabiya journals in two special issues which will be published the beginning of November. Finally, I would like to thank all my colleagues at the Arab Center for all their efforts. Without their efforts, we couldn't have held this Dr. Mundi Lahmar, Dr. Hani Awad, Majd Abu Amir, and also in Siyasat Arabic, Dr. Ahmed Qasim Hussein, Muhammad Khamshi, Ihab Maharma, and also Nagham Al-Aqad, Mu'taz Al-Nadir, and also Faisal Saudi, Ibrahim Abdul Jawad, Amir Saad. And thank you very much, and may the blessings of God be upon you all. Now I invite Dr. Amal Ghazal to chair the first session. Wishing you all success in your deliberations.
Good morning. I'd like to welcome you to this symposium entitled Sports, Politics and Society, organized by the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies. The first session will be addressing the contribution of social sciences of studying sports. We'll start with Mr. Mahfoud, and we have Mr. Haider. I would like just to introduce Dr. Mahfoud Amara, the Associate Professor in Sport Management and Social Sciences, Physical Education Department, College of Education at Qatar University. He formerly served as Director of the Sports Sciences Program at the College of Arts and Science at Qatar University, and before that he held the position of Associate Professor in Sports Social Sciences and Management. Between 2004 and 2014, he was the Deputy Director of the Center for Olympic Studies and Research in the School of Sport, Exercise and Health Sciences. He had published extensively on Arab sports in the colonial and post-colonial context, and he has a book entitled Sport, Politics and Society in the Arab World that has been published in 2014. He'll be talking about the global and local trends in sports studies in the Arab region. 20 minutes, and I can give you an additional 2 minutes. Please. It gives me great pleasure to be amongst you today. I would like to thank those in charge of organizing this conference and choosing sports as an important component of our discussion. Indeed, we need such conferences, research in this domain. I would like to speak in English, if you allow me, because I will be talking about my experience, my research, my questions, and moving from one culture to another, from one language to another. And perhaps it will be better for me to deliver this intervention in English so that I can perhaps paraphrase some of the convoluted terms. But definitely, if you would like to ask me in Arabic, you can do so, and I'll be answering in.
شكرا. Our knowledge and experience of sports is a product of social relations and interactions. The evolving realities of sport as organization, event, and form of practice that does not or do not happen or exist independently from the researcher's inquires knowledge of the world and interconnectedness between the social context and the individual. The globalization of sports and sport studies brought with it different research questions and tradition of questioning sports from diverse philosophical, linguistic, social, economic, and cultural perspectives, offering more opportunities for plurality and alterity in the sense of understanding the otherness of the other, in seeking sameness and respecting diversity. And this is the kind of the theme that I was trying to apply in my research, is always trying to find plurality, plural narratives around sports. If you go to the next slides, please. The next one. For instance, in the study of sport in a given country, one needs to take into account the role of state's ideology and nature of the state, either central, federal, monarchy states, in shaping the national sport system and sport practice. The example of market-driven economy and its approach to commercialization of sports, for instance, in the UK, is different from that of France with its centralized tradition and intervention into the sporting affairs, is different from monarchy state interference and intervention in sport, and there is a long tradition of presence of monarchs and their families in sport as heads of sport federations and national Olympic committees. Next slide, please. If we look specifically at nation-state system and sports in the Arab world, the process of the diffusion of Western sports into Arab countries has taken different means and routes. One of the major influences was the presence of colonialism in its different forms. During the colonial era, sport was a means of coexistence or separation between what we call the colonial society and the colonial administration and the indigenous population. Modern sport practice became also used as a means of resistance by these indigenous populations in the formation of the first clubs that becomes also the bearer of national sentiments and the struggle against colonialism. In the post-independence, sport was integrated into ideologies of development in the Arab world constructed around the idea of national mobilization and international prestige through the integration of international sport organizations and participation in regional and international sport competitions. The newly independent countries have also used international sporting events and particularly media coverage that such events can attract as a space to express their regional political and ideological concerns, for example, against anti-imperialism or apartheid in South Africa. Next slide. Today, in the alleged era of globalization, commercial sport is accepted as the norm in the transfer of Arab societies into the market economy, the injection of local capital into global market through the staging and sponsoring of mega sports events and the sponsoring and the takeover of global sports clubs such as Manchester United, Arsenal, and Paris Saint-Germain. Sport, particularly football, is also used, in the Arab world, particularly among the youth. I think we are going to have some presentations around this topic. It was used as a means of social contestation and for identity claim, for the youth to express their frustration over the harsh social, economic, and political conditions. It is also a source of fraction, or it can be a source of fraction fueled by political, ethnic, and religious tensions within national communities and between Arab societies. Different experiences and narratives, and this is maybe we need to take more, we need to shed light more onto these venues for in terms of research, because most of the studies that are around, maybe they're only focused on the structures and how structures and states and the sports federations and international sports federation and national Olympic committees are shaping the meanings around sports, but we don't have as much studies that looks at the narratives of the individuals themselves in terms of the experience in engaging in sport. So constructivist approach, which does not claim or pretend the generalization of research outcomes, can help in explaining plurality and offering a more in-depth insight into phenomenon being studied. This can be at the level of experience of athletes, sport officials, sport participants, and sport entities with their public, semi-public, private, or non-for-profit. Each individual athletes and sport entity goes through different trajectories, interacting with different stakeholders at different moments and cycle. So more studies needed to shed light on the narratives of individual athletes and champions and celebrities, stars, particularly in the Arab world, in terms of their experience of engaging with sports and how their experience also results in their formation of their own identity and becoming celebrities and being top athletes. The example of Nawal Mutawakkil, the first gold medalist, women gold medalist in the Arab gold medalist in the Olympics. The example of Ghada Shua, from an Arab Christian from Syria, also obtaining a gold medal in the Olympics. Bulmarqa, obtaining her title as a as world champion in athletics during the toughest moments that Algerian history went through, and the example of Al-Hidusi, who is the product of Aspire Academy. All those experiences are really very rich, and then can offer really interesting venues for research. Next one. The other aspects that maybe is worth exploring is the diaspora and Arab diaspora in Europe. Constructivist approach can offer a better angle to the study of ethnic minorities while avoiding pre-established account about cultural acceptance of these minorities in relation to their integration in society in or through sports. Not partaking in formal and institutionalized sports for some minorities is not always a sign of non-integration to or rejection of cultural norms of society, including the norms of sport practice. Some are less engaged with organized and formal sports and prefer to invest more in informal sports within their communities to avoid being exposed and stigmatized. The situation is neither accepting totally being fully a part of minority culture and culture of origin with all what it entails, nor rejecting the culture of origin to claim a full belonging to citizenship of country of birth. And the example of this is Zinedine Zidane has been always asked, are you French or are you Algerian? And his response was, is that as if you are asking me to choose between my mother and my father? I'm both. So I think this is also interesting, when we talk, when we study sport in relation to a minority, Arab minority or Muslim minority in a Western context. The third maybe dimension, the other dimension, the next one, yes, is about woman's body and how it is constructed around tradition and modernity. The visibility of Arab and Muslim women's body in sport competition presented by secular movements, either outside, inside the Arab world, Arab society, or outside, as a sign of their progress and emancipation. To cover women's body in sport for conservative movement is a means of denouncing dominant Western culture in sport and resistance toward westernization of sports. For veiled women athletes covering their body who are participating in a top level sport performance is an opportunity for them to reclaim their own body independently from feminist, secular, or male-dominated religious interpretation, but not in opposition to sport performance. The other final dimension maybe is the power of language and how language is can help us to define knowledge about sport and legitimization, the process of legitimization of this knowledge around sports. For example, I applied this in my study of the professional sports in Algeria. I asked political parties what is their conception of professional sports, and so in examining this process, it depends whom you ask. Arabophone or Francophone, Arab speaking or Francophone in Algeria, and we know what's the meaning of this, the struggle between Arabophone and Francophone in the Algerian context or in the Maghreb, in general. Or if you are asking secular or nationalist or Islamist, the question of modernization of sport in Algeria, in managerial sense, need to be examined through the lenses of politics of language, situated between modernity and tradition, local and global. One need to consider this aspect in examining sport policy documents and public statements of officials and civil servants around sports and the engagement of language as a means of legitimization, and in relation to the Algerian history, in relation to with regards particularly to the politics of language, colonial and post-colonial, socialist, post-socialist, and conflict and post-conflict. If we apply this to the GCC context, and particularly in Qatar, having looked at the official discourse of the decision makers in Qatar with regards to the rationale for engaging in international sport and hosting mega sport events, we can find an interesting themes coming from this policy statement. One is about the emphasis on the policy of building and staging regional and international sports events as a component of development strategies. And then this is an interesting concept. What is development? How is it defined? To establish a global reputation of leading destination of international sporting events, to open the region to the world of business and finance through the sponsoring and the hosting of mega sports events. Qatar and the GCC region, the Gulf region, as a new destination for transnational athletes and coaches, maintaining the notion of tradition and authentic sports in response to those who are maybe making those two as if they were contradictory. I mean, here we have a context where there is a possibility to merge between the two, between the tradition and authenticity on the one side, and modernity and even post-modernity on the other side, and the notion and particularly the importance of hosting these mega events as an opportunity to bridge between East and West. Finally, to conclude, how we position ourselves in all those different aspects. Sport is a complex phenomenon which is practiced, experienced, and consumed in a complex and rapidly changing world. The world has, or here as a real, with multiple realities and increasingly virtual. My analysis is shaped by scholars from the West, but as well as by other scholars from Arab and Islamic cultures. And there is no contradiction in that. Sometimes in the reviewer, when you submit a paper, and then they're asking you, why didn't you use such authors? Maybe because you are using other authors that may not be known, but they are, they have also they are influential within the Arabic context. So the idea is how we can move between those different sources of knowledge and knowledge production between the West and Arab and Islamic cultures, and also to live between spaces of knowledge production, the notion of in-betweenness, in the sense of setting somehow comfortably between cultures and political systems as well as between here and there. As if we take the approach of Edward Saeed. In relation to this notion of worthiness, the comfort between being here and there, which is as rich as being, that, and it needs to be celebrated a little bit more. The idea is not to reject everything coming from the West just because it's originating from the West, and to replace a simplistic vision of the East, of the Orient, in the sense of Orientalism, with that of a simplistic and dogmatic vision of the West, rejecting that everything that comes from the West because it's coming from the West. So we need to be careful not to replace Orientalism with somehow Occidentalism. The next, and maybe this, table reflects kind of the notion of betweenness. So it's not, rather than dichotomy, but it's betweenness between modernity and authenticity, between East and West, between global and local, between insider and outsider, and then a top-down, bottom-up approach, when looking at sports. Finally, to conclude, the globalization of sport and its study from different cultural standpoints paved the way for constructivist approach and inquiry to be embraced as the way forward, maybe to uncover plurality and alterity, to deconstruct dominant discourse about sport as the product of Western modernity, history, and civilization, and to shed light on plural and diverse realities of sport and how its norms and values are defined and implemented in different cultures, considering aspects such as geopolitics, difference of political systems, ethnic makeup of society. One need to also consider the power of language in shaping knowledge, communication, consumption, and legislation about sports. Moreover, the process of constructing legitimacy and credibility for those who are involved in sports, whether governments, sport governing bodies, corporate business sponsors, athletes, sport coaches, PE teachers, and so forth, and so on. And I will finish with that. Shukran.
So the 2 minutes you didn't take, we will loan them to Dr. Haider. Our second speaker is Dr. Haider Saeed. He is the head of research department and editor-in-chief of سياسات عربية, and he, from 2008 onwards, he supervised a number of PhD theses, and in 2014 he supervised the national report, and he has a book entitled Arab Shiites Between Citizenship and Loyalty or Allegiance, and he contributed to another book on ISIS in 2018. Today he will be lecturing on the social sciences and sport. Good morning again. Thank you, Chair Dr. Amal. Like what Dr. Amal has said, the title is Social Sciences and Sport, or the Sport Phenomena. I will start by first illustrating how the literature in the West has dealt with this, and when we started preparing for the two special issues of Imran and Siyasat Arabiya, we prepared a bibliography of what was produced in the field of literature dealing with the sporting phenomena. We found thousands, and I'm not exaggerating, thousands of pieces of literature, especially in academic institutions in the United States and America. I do not make a comparison by noting this, that compared to the Arab contribution, which is barely above the level of zero, and this huge amount of knowledge requires scanning through to understand and to make the comparisons and the themes they focused on and the themes they have ignored. Undoubtedly, this analysis would benefit both sides, those who engage in a meta-scientific approach, studying sports phenomena from this perspective, and also it would benefit sport itself to make everybody understand better how sports and the knowledge produced research it has benefited the sport itself. These are not observations made exclusively by myself, but many other analysts and observers share this observation, and that is how poor the Arab contribution has been. But I want to mention the fact that what this paper aims at is produce the kind of the general trends. There are in particular, two fields of human sciences or social sciences which contributed to the field of studying sports since its establishment in the middle of the 20th century. These are sociology, history and sociology. History coming first. And I think if we are guided by this approach, we'll be able to understand better what has been happening. Maybe history was the first discipline in the West which paid attention to. Since the 20s, 30s, and 40s of the 20th century, different works appeared. Some are still relevant today. Amongst these, which belong to that period and belong to the field of history, we must stress two things. John Richard Bates's book, which is America's Sporting Heritage, from 1850 to 1950. This book was published in 1974 after the death of the author. It was a PhD thesis in 1951. And then the leftist Trinidad writer, L.S. James, who in 1963 he is considered one of the fathers of the post-colonial literature, and is not the same as Frantz Fanon, but he was a leftist activist, a writer, and his book entitled Beyond Borders details how cricket was taken as a space to fight colonialism. These two books and others were not documenting sport as merely sporting events, but they were putting sports in the social and other contexts and how the sports infrastructure was. This kind of linkage makes us compare the contemporary writings to the historical ones, although they are by and large descriptive and documenting the events because they emanate from the given fact that sport is part and parcel of societies and communities, but the historical works did not pose the very basic and founding question which precedes the definition of sport as a characteristic of modern society. They deal with it as how it was established and distinguished itself from other social phenomena. So these early works with the other linkages of sporting events as voluntary, self-conscious decisions, and they were trying to place sports in the social context and sometimes even taken as a space to fight colonialism, as was done by James. Now I am devising this knowledge map in this way, which this is discovered through the research, and I am assuming here that the early works on history was not driven by the epistemological concerns, and therefore they have no place to the map I'm trying to draw here, which can contribute to understand how the social sciences have developed. So if we try to understand the sports phenomena in this deeper aspect, we go back to the 60s, Norbert Eliot's efforts, who is regarded as the pioneer of the sociology of sport. This is a different discipline because of the many studies he has done and the theoretical aspects and also the applications he derived. And at that time, most other researchers did not consider sports as a phenomena worthy of studying. So therefore, our starting point is in the 60s, and I'm trying here to establish what happened. What happened was Elias, who left Germany after the Nazis came to power and went to Britain, like many other of his compatriots, and in Britain he managed to apply his social ideas, which he started in his book Civilizing Process in the 30s. This book was published in German in 1939. This is the English translation of the book. Some say that a better translation would have been On the Process of Civilization. In his book, he started studying the social development of modern Europe, and he considered sport as an integral part of this history. And apart from this coincidental meeting of Elias with others, his complete works were published in 19 volumes. The 7th volume collects all his works on sport, and it was published jointly with a British socialist work whose name was Denning. Once again, why the 60s? It seems to me that this is linked to the wider wave of the view to how modern Europe was formed in the aftermath of World War II, Nazism and fascism. And before delving deeper into what Eliade says, is his works were discovered maybe or paid attention to at a later stage, and his students considered him to be ranked amongst the prime writers in this field. But I think until the publication of the English translation of his book in 1969, he was not that well known. we cannot understand his social approach to understanding sport. For example, some Bourdieu's theory on the habitus and social discrimination, etc. Ilias is a special case because, like Bourdieu, he went beyond sports as a field of practice and experimentation, which goes beyond the theoretical aspect, which helps us to understand European society. So therefore, Ilyas is looked at as someone who tried to go beyond the dichotomies governing the concepts at that time and introducing some new one. His students agree unanimously that his theory, in my personal estimation, that Ilyas's lack of fame because he has his own terminology, which looks, his scientific language sometimes seems to be disconnected from the language used by figurational society. Sometimes he's, and this is one of the terms he uses. Let me just ignore some. Ilyas says sport as a field that humanity achieved three things through sports: the formation of the conscience and the rationalization and forming or incentives of understanding in incentives. And he's talking about how Europe moved from the old ages to the modern ages and the contribution of sport to human civilization, and how this trinity developed from sports and competitions in the Olympic era and to sports becoming. And I want to mention that Imran will publish as an original text by Ilyas about sport. Ilyas also researched into the sport linked to violent competition to more of a rational competition. So therefore, we cannot separate that from what Max Weber has said. And if I could place what Ilyas is saying, in my estimation, he transferred studying sports from the field of history into an area in between history, anthropology, and sociology. On the one hand, his work cannot be separated from history because he traced that from the old ages to the modern ages, and cannot be separated from anthropology because he discovers values and cultural aspects, and it's not separated from sociology because it links it to the development of European societies. The other theoretician, Pierre Bourdieu, who since the end of the 70s had many contributions to analyzing the sporting phenomena. Between 78 and 79, Bourdieu published 4 chapters which are the basis of his theory or his approach. The idea I wrote here is Bourdieu wanted to separate sports from the other conceptual ideas. On the one hand, he deals with sport as an expression of the class manifestation, but the class here is not a material thing, but it is like cultural capital and social capital, etc. It's that kind of capitalism. He also deals with sports as a field. He makes a comparison with other fields of politics and religion, and saying that there is a supply and demand sort of thing in the field, and also another author discusses the choices by cultural capital forms the habitus. He also lists a controversial idea. He says that modern sport was born in public schools in Britain, which were like the Ivy League schools exclusively available to the bourgeoisie. This is the idea he presents as the birthplace of modern sport, and this may be problematic, but if you allow me, I want to read a quotation which will take 2 minutes, but it's important to tell us what he wants from sociology and his interaction with Elias. This is from his book published in 1978, which says questions on, in English, sociology in question. This is an important chapter. He says, first we must inquire about historical conditions. Now he is speaking in the language of a historian of ideas. He asks, wonders about the historical conditions behind modern sports that we accept as a given. What are the social conditions which made it possible directly or indirectly, which is linked to the activities of sports? The system of institutions and actors is built on the idea that people cannot understand directly what does sport mean without linking them directly to the social and economic conditions. The history of sport is relatively independent, even if there are indications that it's linked to, it has its specific chronology. So therefore, one of the most important tasks in the field of sociology is to build the historical genealogy of sport. We cannot reduce this into something else. This genealogy on its own can answer the question on the moment that from which we can describe sport as a private or personal activity, not a ritual, and as not disconnected to previous events, and this leads me to raise some doubts on the value of some historical studies of studying sports. This comparison can only be justified if as one Norbert Elias did, aimed at understanding the nature and the essence of sports and how the activities which were known before. And I think Bourdieu is trying not to connect with Elias, but to show his disconnection with Elias. What he's trying to say is that we cannot consider modern sport a continuation of ritual, physical, and other activities. History is a new type which appeared in the modern society. Now I want to mention his class approach, which is compared to his book in 1966 on the educational system in France. And his book, Bourdieu, talks about the size of the capital, and this is not a materialistic capital, but the means of and based on the happiness and he says that the cultural practices that lifestyles are not driven by personal choices, but the social ranking and the capital class fraction. This leads to the production of the habitus and then makes the lifestyle the usual and accepted phenomena. And maybe sports is one of the most evident example that something which is not determined by the individual, but it's linked to the social capital. Elias and Bourdieu I think their approaches have left their marks on this field as a field which supposes previous theoretical hypotheses. And this is an important summary. The developments in social theory have impacted and reflected on studying sports. Therefore, studying sports is not just an empirical thing. It was used to understand theories. Therefore, social sciences dealt with sports, dealing with sport as a phenomena similar to identity or religion or something. They include other things. So therefore, the fundamental question was not a causal question, why religion, for example, but how it's used. And despite Elias' contribution, I go back to my original idea that modern sports express a philosophical and conceptual change. Elias also did not deal with sport as part of the process of civilization. I stop here. This paper is not confined to Elias and Bourdieu. In the paper, I deal with two interlinked questions. The role of critical sociology and the role of sports in that, and the word criticism is linked to the Frankfurt School. Of course, there's a lot of literature on this, and the last thing I would like to say, maybe I think there are many approaches which all contribute to making sport part and parcel of the cultural studies. First of all, cultural studies is an expression. Some people think it's problematic, but I'm building this idea on something. If cultural studies emanate from changing or taking these phenomena from ancient societies and applying them and studying them within the scope of modern communities, and I discuss some details like the Marxist contribution in cultural studies, and even these texts, the Bourdieu's text and others are looked now as one of the cultural If you take a reader of the cultural studies, you will find that what Bourdieu wrote in 78, 79 was re-included as one of the texts in the field of cultural studies. Thank you. I don't know if I give a good summary or not, but thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Haider. Thank you, Dr. Mahfoud. Yes, sport does indeed represent an engagement with the society. If you go to the Colonium Museum, this sport represented a form of violence in the past, and in societies that had aimed for liberation, the sport indeed reflected that propensity. Do you think that, and I think Dr. Haider, you need to have included economics in the title, because I think that the modern kind of sport is intrinsically linked to commercialization, and I think we need to deal with the economic dimension in this regard. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you both. I don't have a question, but a comment. The relationship between Bourdieu and Elias is the same between Durkheim and Weber. The total reciprocal dismissal. The habitus is a concept of Elias, and it's nothing to do with Bourdieu, who took it from Bourdieu, who talked about religion, in contrast of Marx talking about religion. So, consequently, this perhaps coherence or the joint kind of method of thinking between Elias and Bourdieu is perhaps unknown partially. The second point is as follows. The issue of sport has been included in the anthropology when the theoreticians talked about the movement of the body by Marcel Mauss, who is a pillar as far as the sociological studies are concerned, because he said that the use of the body and the movement of the body are important issues, and Zimmel as well talked about the psychology of coquetry, and he talked about those women who walk the way the cats walk, what we call the catwalk, and so there is an anthropological part in this theme. I would like now to turn to Dr. Mahfoud. The introduction that you have exhibited in accordance with the language that you've studied in is kind of ethnocentrist, albeit you've used constructivism, and I have seen the texts that we are about to publish in our journal. there is a missing link between anthropology and the sociological studies as far as sport is concerned, because we don't have any text, any anthropological text that talks about the sports that we have known as the pre-industrial societies. So I think as far as the Moroccan Fantasia is concerned, I think we'll be receiving a text that is pertinent to this. And it is nothing to do with the body technique. It is a collective effort and it has its own fans. And in the Gulf, we have collective sports as well. So there is a missing link here. And Dr. Haider has said that there is a scarcity in the research papers as far as this issue is concerned. And we faced a number of problems when we wanted to organize this conference. So because we had jurors who had no experience in this domain. We had only two who had experience. So I just wanted to shed light on this issue because you haven't raised the issue of having a missing link between anthropology and social studies in this regard. You have talked about this issue and I hope that it will be studied in the future. Thank you and good morning. Imad Mansour. My name is Imad Mansour. We had no privilege to access the texts, so I would like to ask Dr. Mahfoud through what Mr. Haider has said. Bourdieu is an anthropologist and he had studied the body and he had talked about different issues that are pertinent to social studies. So my question to you, as far as the practices and the reading of the body is concerned, what is the project that you might shed light on as far as the interest in the narrative is concerned? Here we're talking about athletes from both sexes, because you've started and you've said that I deliberately look through this methodology, but I don't want to generalize it. But you have provided us with some post-colonial models and individuals. So how can we link the narrative with this social phenomena? And how can we arrive at a melting pot rather than just sporadic parts of the narrative itself? Thank you for posing these questions. I would like to answer in Arabic. I think the issue is to do with the terminology. We haven't talked about fantasy, we've talked about traditional games and collective games, and we've talked about sport in its modern institutional definition that is totally different than the traditional games. So we need to be accurate when it comes to terminology. Yes, there is another field that is pertinent to anthropology, how traditional games are being transformed into institutional and organized sports. And here geopolitics also plays a role, and how some countries have more power to impose their own traditional games so that they can become Olympic games. Wrestling, for example, in Asia has become an Olympic game. The Taekwondo, following the organization of the Olympics by South Korea. Taekwondo has been included in the Olympics at a later stage. So indeed, these traditional sports can be transformed into modern sports. And what we mean by modern sports relates to certain terminology and the legal, legislative, institutional, organizational nuances and dimensions. We as Arabs and Muslims have a role to play to perhaps transform our own traditional games to become institutionalized and perhaps border kind of international or global games. I would like to comment on Mr. Haider's intervention. One of the most important researchers or theoreticians is Anthony Giddens, who talked about the modern sport being the outcome of European modernity. And here we face a problem as experts in the sport-related social studies. We look at the matter from the Oriental kind of lens, and because the West has the terminology, the West has transformed its traditional games into becoming institutionalized global games. So I think we must have our own narrative, a different narrative. We don't have to refuse all what comes from the West, especially the knowledge, but we need perhaps to have our own intellectuals and our own terminology in theoretizing sports in the Arab Islamic context. When we talk about modernity and constructivism and so on and so forth, we can go back to Ibn Khaldun. Bourdieu wrote his first book in Algeria when he was in the French army. He talked about the sociology, and he was impacted by the other and how the other has thought. Arkoun as well talks about the intellectual and his or her opposite, and how sports have been perhaps subjugated to the structures, and the individual has been dismissed, especially when it comes to his or her experience. Researchers are focusing on the major tournaments, they're focusing on the institutions, on the federations, on the interests, the commercial interests of the consumers, and there is no scope to perhaps focus on the individual, especially the Arab athletes, and the way they can narrate their own story as citizens, especially when we talk about women and sport. Women athletes are being dismissed kind of or ignored in the Arab societies. So we need perhaps to have more research papers to focus on the individual. And here we can resort to Foucault, who talked about post-constructionalism and how it can be used. And Arkoun as well can play a role and provide us with some tools. Thank you. Thank you for posing these questions, Dr. Hamid. Yes, there is a sub-discipline about the economics of sports, and there are journals that are specialized in economy, economists and others, but I couldn't just have to generalize the matter. I just wanted to pick some theoreticians, and there is a discipline that is called the philosophy of sports, and books about the philosophy of sports. But what I wanted to look through is the beginning of sociology and the link thereby with sports. Dr. Mauludi, the relationship between Rias and Bordeaux. Bordeaux, yes, refers to Elias, but Elias doesn't. Elias has tackled this issue before Bordeaux. But there is a point that I'm interested in the issue of the body. At least from my own perspective, I think this is out of the scope. Foucault and others who have studied the movement of the body, and Marcel Mauss, as you have said, I think that the important question is this genre or this kind of discipline that relates to the sport itself. But talking about the body itself, I think it is out of the scope of sports itself. Giddens and Baudrillard and Foucault and the other Western academics addressed the sports phenomena. However, Giddens, for example, I had a conception that Giddens played a major role in sports. However, when I went back to the literature, I couldn't compare him in this discipline to others because Elias was more prominent and Bourdieu as well. Lastly, when it comes to the Arab context and the way I think of the sports phenomena, Elias relied on Johannes Gonzinger, the Dutch theoretician, and I have a paragraph in my paper that talks about this issue, and because he wrote about the transformation of the concept of playing in the Western societies, and Elias built upon this. But these kind of issues were not studied within the Arab Islamic context. However, from my own perspective, I think the study of this issue in the Arab Islamic context will be totally different. Yes, we can study the concept of playing in the Islamic or Arab ancient civilization, but will this lead to understanding the modern sport, or will we be having outcomes that are pertinent to the modern facets of sports? I don't think so, personally. Yes, I can talk about this issue with you if you have a different opinion. Hozinga has studied the phenomenon of playing in the Western societies. Why don't we do so? But I think that this will never lead to the concept of the modern sport. We might talk about a societal kind of facet in reliance on the local heritage, but I don't know. I think the outcomes will be different. Thank you. Another set of questions. Thank you. Good morning. Thank you My name is Sarah Mhanna Naimi, and I'm a PhD student at the University of Qatar, and I'm specialized in the sports diplomacy. I would like to thank Dr. Mahfoud, who invited me to come here, and I do appreciate his invitation. I would like to thank the participants. I have two questions to Mr. Mahfoud. كيف يمكن الرياضة أن تفضي إلى سردية رياضية سيما فيما يخص المرأة الخليجية؟ How could the sports-related studies in the Arab world, how could they lead to an academic kind of debate in the Arab world? And this question is addressed to Mr. Dr. Haider. Thank you. I have an observation vis-à-vis Dr. Haider's paper, who tried to focus on the social studies and the link thereby with the sports phenomena. I think it is difficult to portray such a knowledge-based roadmap to ignore a towering personality, Marcel Mauss, in his book that allocated a whole chapter to the body's technicality, and he doesn't think that sports is just a societal phenomenon. However, it is a total social phenomenon, which means that there is a plurality of the implications and the dimensions of the sports phenomenon, because it has socioeconomic, cultural, and economic dimensions as well. Thank you. Good morning. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you. I would like to thank Dr. Amara and Dr. Haider for the two papers, and I'd like to attract your attention to one missing link: symbolism. Sports without a symbolic dimension will remain sports. I would like to give you an example. If one team wins 2-0, it will stay a fact, 2-0, and normal kind of news. However, if the fans kind of lifted certain flags and they delved into politics and so on and so forth, so this phenomenon will be transformed into a different dimension. So this sports phenomenon is kind of a cycle that has different dimensions in accordance with the discipline that I'm kind of specialized in. So there is anthropology here, political sciences, and so on and so forth. The sports-related sciences, I wonder, do they belong to a certain kind of discipline? Because in some universities, the sports-related sciences are being taught under the banner of philosophy, sometimes under the banner of sciences, and so on and so forth. So we need to deal with this phenomenon with different perspectives and different dimensions and different interests. I would like to comment on what Dr. Haider has said. In conclusion, you've said that sports is part and parcel of cultural studies, right? And you've said that the foundations of the sports phenomenon related to Bourdieu and the Frankfurt School of Thought and the School of Criticism. Do you think that, currently speaking, focus is based on functional kind of school of thought? Dr. Mahfoud has said most of his writings are to do with how politics utilizes sport for the aim to perhaps provocation, and we do recall what happened between Algeria and Egypt in 2013, and politics played a major role in that game. There's also the functional kind of dimension, and we can't say that this domain must relate to one only dimension. I do understand that you would like to perhaps provide certain reasons or have epistemological kind of elements to deal with the sports phenomenon, and I agree with you, but I do believe that everyone has his own rug, if I might say. You can't pull the rug from under the feet of any other. Thank you. Last question. I would like to greet you all. I'd like to thank the two panelists. I'm from Tetuan. My name is Wadi Al Janabi. I'm a researcher. The two papers were indeed great. They kind of framed the link between sports and sociology. The sociology of the sports in the 90s took heed of the phenomenon of hooliganism and violence. And those who delve into the theoretical literature understands that there are prominent researchers in the Arab world and in the Western societies who dealt with these phenomena. And here I talk about Dominic Buda, who is prolific in his writings, hooliganism, of course, and the social contract of hooliganism, and there is also limit constructive for another writer, and there are numerous studies in the Arab world that had focused on hooliganism as well, and indeed they took place following the 2011 Arab Spring. Lotfi Zahi has a study in 2012 in Tunisia. Shema bin Rajab has two studies as well, and I would like just to say that the Arab world is focusing on the sports phenomenon from the lenses of politics that are linked to the impact of sports itself on the societal phenomena, protests, hooliganism, and so on and so forth. Another point is the fact that the sports-related actions are subject to the theory of the manufacturing of consumerism, and the Frankfurt School of Thought provide us with thought, a number of thoughts in this regard. The industry of consumerism is omnipresent, and it has nothing to do perhaps with the civilized actions, but it is related to economics. It has been commercialized in order to emphasize consumerism. Last point. As far as modernity is concerned, sport has turned into a tool whereby women exercise their own rights within the public domain. And as you know, football for women is playing a major role in this regard. Thank you. 2 minutes. Yes, there is a link between what the two doctors have said. The multidisciplinary issue can include sport, and we must perhaps have a specialty to study the sports-related sciences, and it can be linked also to other domains of knowledge. And I think the missing link is having sports as a sub-discipline, and I think it is high time for this sport to have its own discipline. Sarah's question was spot on, and I think when it comes to the identity narratives يمكن دراستها من خلال جوانب مختلفة. أولها أكاديمي.
We have more female who are academics and specialized in sports in the GCC, including yourself, Sarah, and we count on you in terms of developing knowledge around this topic. Being a GCC woman, Qatari woman, studying sport from inside, and engage, between those different knowledge, either produced in the West or produced here, and trying to find maybe a position within those different talks. Then you can study it as a practitioner. We have now more women in the sports organizations. For example, the International Olympic Committee, now they impose on all national Olympic committees to have 20% women represented in the national Olympic committees as a condition for them to participate in the Olympics. فوجود الآن بروز الآن المرأة في we have now more women in decision making. This is also interesting to find out about their experience of being in a main dominated field, how they are positioning themselves as a female athletes. فقط the last one is about female women as athlete. 2012 was the year where all Arab and Muslim countries participated in the Olympic Games. So now all Arab and Muslim countries, they have women athletes participating in the Olympic Games at the highest level, and this offer really interesting, kind of venue for research in terms of the experience of those women, including from the GCC. شكرا.
ما في ذلك في الخليج. Thank you again. Yes, I think an event like this, and I think we'll be dealing with the socioeconomic, cultural, and political dimensions of the World Cup in Qatar in the next session. I think in the introductory remarks, I said that studies in this domain will be afoot. And as far as the Qatar case is concerned, we have literature. There are literature that talks about soft power, the concept of development, and so on and so forth. Dr. Mohammed al-Naimi and Dr. Mouldi. I can go to Marcel Mossi because what I am interested on is not the philosophy of the body, but at the end of the day, yes, Marcel Mossi, I need to go back to him and read his works. Dr. Kamal, I think that sports-related studies are numerous. They are like an empire. There are different domains and different dimensions, governance-related issues, and I just wanted perhaps to put into place a knowledge-based map that might lead to cultural studies. Yes, functional approaches definitely have their own domain, and I don't know whether there is a person on this earth that might provide us with one map that encompasses everything, but I had my own perspective, and I think that Elias and Bourdieu's approach will lead to cultural studies. As far as the phenomenon of hooliganism is concerned, we have 2 sessions tomorrow that shall tackle the ultras phenomenon in the Arab world and hooliganism. Yes, in the Maghreb, in the Arab Maghreb, we have studies, and in Egypt as well. Not perhaps academic works per se, but I think that there are studies that will be added to the literature of hooliganism, protests, and ultras, the ultras. Thank you all. Before I conclude, I would like to say that Dr. Abdel Fattah Madi will be moderating the next session, and he's the head of one of the units in the center. There were questions on the social media, and I do apologize for not answering these questions, but we have answered most of the questions. Thank you. We'll come back in 10 minutes.